Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today you're joining us for, well, quite an extraordinary exploration.
We're unpacking some really grand ideas, looking at spiritual connections that stretch right across cosmic history.
Yeah, we've got this fascinating text here. It tackles, nothing less than the evolution of our planet and how echoes of ancient consciousness might still be present in our cultures today.
It's definitely a journey through immense timescales. We'll be looking at these recurring patterns in civilizations, the Earth's very beginnings, its primordial state.
And how consciousness itself has shifted over, well, eons.
Exactly. And our aim, really, is to distill the most compelling, maybe the most thought-provoking aspects for you.
Right, because the source material, it gets into repeating cultural epochs, the Earth's initial sort of misty existence.
And those dramatic separations, the sun, the moon, the Earth splitting apart.
It's ambitious stuff, definitely. But the way these seemingly separate ideas connect is, frankly, pretty astounding.
It really is.
So let's dive in. We'll start way back, maybe at the dawn of our solar system, and try to trace these threads through human experience.
Okay, let's start with these repetitions. The ones within the post-Atlantean cultures. The text suggests this really fascinating mirroring effect.
Mirroring? How so?
Well, where the first cultural epoch after Atlantis, it resonates with the seventh, and then the Persian, the second one, echoes the sixth. And the Egyptian, the third, mirrors the fifth, which is essentially our current era.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this a bit. So you're saying ancient India, the first epoch, might hold clues or parallels to some future seventh epoch.
That's the suggestion, yeah.
And the ancient Persians somehow connect with a sixth one down the line? It's like history isn't just, A, then B, then C.
Exactly. It's not just a straight line. It has these underlying rhymes, these resonances across vast periods.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is the idea that the Greco-Latin culture, which is the fourth in this sequence, is unique. It stands alone.
It doesn't have a mirror.
No direct counterpart in this cyclical pattern, according to the text. And this unique position, it says, can actually offer us insights into the depths of our own soul life.
Right, right. And this is where it gets really interesting for me. The idea that these aren't just like historical coincidences, but they might tell us something profound about our inner selves, our soul life, as you said.
That's definitely a key point to consider. But there's also a really crucial caution in the text.
Okay.
We shouldn't treat these repetitions as some kind of strict formula. Something you could just solve with logic. It really emphasizes the need for what it calls spiritual perception, a more intuitive grasp, perhaps, something that goes beyond just intellectual analysis.
So it's less about like drawing neat diagrams and fitting cultures into boxes, and more about sensing the deeper currents that connect them, like a spiritual aha moment maybe, rather than just a logical deduction.
Exactly that. The text really suggests that a true understanding of these connections comes from a developed spiritual insight, almost like how a seer might perceive the underlying patterns of history.
Okay.
To really get these cultural epochs, we need to take a much broader view, see Earth's evolution almost as this unified whole.
Right. So the cyclical view, if we accept it, it suggests that the challenges, maybe the triumphs too, of past epochs might hold lessons or patterns for us now and for the future.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's broaden that perspective then way out. What does the source tell us about the very, very beginnings of Earth? We're talking before solid ground, right? A cosmic scale.
Oh, even more fundamental than that, really. The text describes Earth's earliest state, not as physical matter, not as we know it, but as this kind of fundamental energetic substance called the etheric mist. Think of it as the raw potential for physical reality itself.
Etheric mist. Okay.
And imagine something just vast, far larger than our current solar system, a nebulous expanse containing the potential for everything, Earth, the other planets, even the sun, all in one.
Whoa. So before there were distinct planets, it was all just this cosmic fog of potential. That's mind-bending.
It is.
And what was this mist made of? You said potential.
Well, the analogy used is quite striking, actually. It says, think of a swarm of gnats.
Okay, like a cloud of insects.
Yeah. From a distance, it looks like a single cloud.
Right.
But up close, you see countless individual gnats.
Right.
So similarly, this primordial mist was composed of countless fine individual etheric points. But these points weren't just empty space. They held something profound.
The potential you mentioned for all future forms.
Exactly. The archetypal forms, like the underlying blueprint for everything that would eventually exist.
Can you give an example of an archetype like that?
Sure. The text uses the rose seed, To our physical eyes, it's just this tiny speck, right? But a clairvoyant, it says, would perceive something else, a spiritual light form emerging from it, the archetype of the rose.
Ah, so not a physical blueprint, but the spiritual essence, the ideal form.
Precisely. The actual plant that grows later is just, in a way, a physical manifestation, maybe even a shadow of this vibrant spiritual blueprint.
Okay, I think I'm getting that picture. So these etheric points back in the early Earth mist, they weren't random. They contained these spiritual archetypes for everything, including us.
That's the core idea, yes. The archetype of the human form, the potential for who we eventually become, was slumbering spiritually within those primal etheric points.
Slumbering.
Yeah. And the whole process of Earth's evolution, in this view, was the unfolding of that potential. Kind of like the rose needs the earth and sun to grow from its seed, its archetype.
That's a really powerful image. So let's fast forward a bit then. How did we get from this unified mist, this potential, to the distinct sun, moon, earth we see today?
Okay. The text describes an initial unity, a time when sun, moon, and earth existed as a single cosmic body.
All mixed together.
All mixed together. Imagine all those components in a state of, well, undifferentiated potential, like ingredients in a primordial soup before they separate out.
And humanity, where were we in that?
In that very early stage, humanity could only exist in a spiritual condition, a potential within that unity.
Because the conditions were just too intense, the raw energy of the future sun still mixed in.
That seems to be the implication. It was an environment suited only for spiritual existence. For a vast period, this single cosmic body contained everything. Until a huge event occurred. The sun split off. It became a separate entity, leaving Earth and the moon still together. So that unity became a duality.
Why? Why did the sun separate? What was the sort of trigger?
The text explains it in terms of the development of spiritual beings connected with Earth. Beings we might think of as angels, archangels, archai.
Right, the hierarchies.
Yes, each at different stages of spiritual evolution. These weren't physically visible, but were integral to this whole process.
So these spiritual beings, they had their own evolutionary needs, and the cosmos itself shifted to accommodate them. Is that it?
That's essentially the picture painted. Some of these more advanced beings, they needed a different kind of dwelling place, maybe a different tempo for their evolution.
A different environment.
Yes. Perhaps the denser energies of the early Earth-Moon combination were no longer conducive for them. So they took the finest, most subtle substances from that original mist and basically formed their new home in the sun.
Leaving the denser stuff behind.
Remaining bound to the denser substances of Earth would have apparently hindered their progress.
That's a fascinating way to think about cosmic events driven by spiritual evolution. So what about Earth and Moon left behind? Who was guiding them?
Well, according to the text, a particularly significant being, one who was actually advanced enough to have potentially gone with the sun group, chose to sacrifice that possibility, to remain with the Earth plus Moon body. That's how it's framed. This being is identified as Yahweh, or Jehovah. He essentially became the guiding force for the development of life on this dual Earth-Moon body.
Okay, so we have this major contrast set up. The sun, home to the most exalted beings. The text uses the term pleroma, the fullness, and then Earth plus Moon, under the guidance of Yahweh, who stayed behind. A fundamental split.
It really sets the stage for the next big change, which was the separation of the moon from the Earth.
Right, the second split.
Yes, and the text presents the sun as this principle of sublime light, while the moon becomes associated with the principle of darkness.
Darkness, again, in a spiritual sense, not just the absence of sunlight.
Exactly, a different quality. And before the moon was expelled, the Earth itself was dramatically different. Imagine a fiery core.
Okay.
Surrounded by this fluid metal-containing water, not like our water today, much denser perhaps.
And life, humanity.
The human form is described as soft, fluid, almost fish amphibian-like. And crucially, there was no air to breathe. Existence was totally different.
No air. Wow. So why did the moon have to leave? Why was that separation necessary for us?
The text states it was absolutely crucial for humanity's evolutionary tempo, for our development.
How so?
Well, if the sun had remained within Earth, things would have apparently progressed too quickly, maybe burned out our potential.
Okay.
But conversely, the forces associated with the moon, if it had stayed fused with Earth, would have slowed things down too much, made us too dense, perhaps even hardened things prematurely.
So it was about finding the right rhythm for development.
Exactly. The moon's departure, which happened amid tremendous catastrophes, allowed for the gradual development of an air sheath around the Earth, though initially filled with thick vapors.
And this prepared the way for the human form we know.
Slowly, yes. It allowed for the right conditions to eventually emerge.
So these cosmic breakups, they weren't random disasters, they were essential steps, purposeful.
That's the perspective offered, yes. Necessary stages.
Let's circle back then to human consciousness during all these immense shifts. What was it like?
Okay. In that initial unified sun, earth, moon period, the text says humanity existed purely in a spiritual state, like an etheric body, only visible to spiritual sight. Very different from now.
Just potential within the light.
Then, during that earth moon phase, after the sun left, conditions became less favorable. The text even suggests a potential danger of humanity developing into a malicious and savage kind of being if things hadn't progressed further.
Wow. That sounds like a close call. So what changed things after the moon also separated?
Well, that separation led to the emergence of a threefold principle. Sun, earth, moon. 3 distinct influences. And this, according to the text, brought with it a new element in human consciousness, a feeling of longing.
Longing for what?
For that original unity, a kind of subconscious memory of this state before the separations began.
A cosmic homesickness almost.
You could put it that way. And the text then introduces the next major phase, the Lemurian epoch, which followed the moon's separation and was marked by these great fire catastrophes.
Okay.
Which eventually gave way to the Atlantean epoch.
Right. So with the moon now separate, its influences acting on Earth, how did this shift things leading into Lemuria and then the famous Atlantis?
Well, the conditions were slowly becoming more suitable for a different kind of existence, leading towards Atlantis.
Atlantis, okay, we've all heard the myths. What was consciousness actually like then, according to the source? It sounds crucial.
It was fundamentally different from ours. The text describes Atlantean consciousness as primarily clairvoyant, a stark contrast to our present-day sense-focused awareness.
Clairvoyant? How?
It uses a really powerful analogy. Imagine you're walking through really dense fog. Streetlights don't look sharp, they have this hazy aura around them.
Okay, yeah.
That's kind of like how Atlanteans perceived the physical world during their waking hours. Everything physical was misty, veiled, not sharp and clear like it is for us.
So their daytime reality was fuzzy.
Fuzzy, yes. Less distinct. It's quite a thought, isn't it? To consider a time when waking and sleeping were almost the reverse of what we experience.
It really makes you question what we consider real.
It does.
So, misty during the day? What about at night? Did they just sleep?
No. That's the other key difference. When they were asleep, out of their physical bodies, they didn't sink into unconsciousness like we mostly do.
What happened then?
Instead, they found themselves consciously participating in a world of divine spiritual beings. They perceived these beings, interacted with them, saw them as companions.
So their waking physical consciousness was dimmed, but their sleeping spiritual consciousness was vivid and connected.
Exactly. Connected to the spiritual realm, to the gods, you might say.
That's a complete flip from our experience. We feel sharpest during the day, focused on the physical, and mostly disconnected or unconscious at night.
It's a radical difference in how consciousness operated.
Okay, let's just recap these 4 huge epochs then. First, unified sun, earth, moon, purely spiritual human potential.
Right.
Second, sun separates, earth, moon phase, potential for a negative turn. Third, moon separates, earth on its own, longing for unity arises, potential for our current path. And fourth, Atlantis, with that misty physical world but direct communion with divine beings in sleep.
Precisely. You've got it. And this understanding of Atlantis is key because it brings us to the post-Atlantean epochs, the ones that shape our recorded history and current understanding.
Her cultures now.
Yes. Indian, Persian, Egyptian, Greco-Latin, and our current 5th epoch. The text posits that these cultures are, in essence, memories, echoes of those earlier Earth epochs we just discussed.
Whoa, okay. So the ancient religions, the worldviews we study, they weren't just invented. They were literally echoes of these massive cosmic events and consciousness shifts from before.
That's the central idea being presented here, yes. It reframes cultural history quite dramatically.
How does that work? Give me an example. Ancient India.
Okay. The ancient Indian culture, with its profound emphasis on an inner, unified consciousness, the concept of Brahm or Brahma, that's seen as an inner reflection, a memory of that original unified sun-earth-moon period.
A memory of cosmic unity.
And the presence of those lofty spiritual beings on Earth during that time. It's remembered inwardly.
Okay. What about the Persian focus? That famous battle between light and darkness? Ahura Mazda and Ahriman.
That duality, the text argues, is a direct remembrance of the second epoch, the separation of the sun, the emergence of these opposing forces of light and, well, not exactly darkness, but the denser principles left with Earth-Moon.
So the struggle between good and evil in their cosmology
is seen as an echo of that fundamental split, the sun's light versus the more challenging forces.
Makes sense in that framework. And the Egyptian obsession with trinities, Osiris, Isis, Horus being the most famous.
That reflects the third epoch, the trinity that arose after the moon, separated from the Earth, Sun, Moon, Earth as distinct influences.
And this wasn't just Egypt, right? Chaldea, Babylon.
Yes, the text groups Chaldean, Babylonian, Assyrian cultures with the Egyptian in this context, all reflecting that threefold cosmic reality. So these core religious ideas weren't just philosophy. They were rooted in humanity's distant, almost unimaginable past experience.
This is fascinating. What about the Greek gods? Zeus, Athena, Apollo, that whole pantheon?
Those are presented as memories, faded perhaps, but memories nonetheless, of the divine spiritual beings the Atlanteans actually encountered during their nightly journeys out of the body.
The companions they met in their sleep.
Exactly. The gods they perceived clairvoyantly in that state became the deities of the later Greco-Latin world, remembered through myth and legend.
Wow. So our myths are legends. They could be seen as these sort of like fragmented recollections of a time when the spiritual world was much more immediate.
That's the perspective, yes.
All right.
A past that was far more spiritually vibrant, or at least experienced differently.
Okay. So where does that leave us? Our current fifth post-Atlantean epoch. What are we remembering? Or maybe not remembering?
Well, that's the crucial point for our time. The text states that this fifth period has largely lost those direct innate memories.
Lost them.
Yes. Or they've receded deep into the unconscious. And this is presented as the reason why a sense of separation from the spiritual world, maybe even a tendency towards godlessness, has become so prevalent. We don't have that built-in remembered connection anymore.
So if we've lost the direct memories, how does humanity in this fifth epoch find its way back? Or find a new way forward to spiritual understanding?
That's the big question the text seems to pose for our time. It highlights the importance of what it calls the Christ force, not necessarily in a purely traditional religious sense, but as a new impulse entering human evolution.
An impulse for what?
As a preparation for a future reunion with the gods, or the spiritual world. A way to consciously develop a new kind of spiritual awareness, replacing the old clairvoyance we lost.
So consciousness needs to change again.
It says consciousness in this fifth period must become apocalyptic.
Apocalyptic, that sounds dramatic.
Not necessarily in the sense of just destruction, though transformation can be disruptive, more in the original meaning of apocalypse, an unveiling, a revealing.
Revealing new spiritual truths.
Yes, and shifting our understanding, looking forward to a new spiritual revelation rather than just remembering the past unconsciously.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier our fifth period echoes the Egyptian, the third epoch. How does that connection help us move forward?
The text suggests this mirroring isn't just an echo, it provides a kind of foundation, a point of departure. By understanding the challenges and insights of the Egyptian epoch and its connection to the Trinity, we can find clues or a starting point for building towards that future, more conscious spiritual understanding.
Interesting. Using the past echo to navigate the future path.
Something like that. It gives us a context for where we are and where we might be heading.
Okay, so to try and bring this incredible journey together, we've explored this idea of cyclical cultural epochs, not just random history, but reverberations of these huge cosmic shifts, sun separating, moon separating.
And the transformations in human consciousness that went along with them. From purely spiritual to the unique Atlantean clairvoyance to our current sense-based awareness.
Right, and our current fifth epoch stands in this unique spot. We've mostly lost the direct memories of those earlier times, that connection.
Which creates both challenges and possibilities. A potential for feeling cut off, but also the task of looking forward, of consciously building a new connection.
Towards a future spiritual reawakening, perhaps, using new faculties.
That seems to be the direction pointed towards.
So that leads us, I suppose, to a final thought for you, listening. Consider how these immense cosmic cycles, these echoes from unimaginably ancient times, might still resonate today.
Yeah, think about aspects of our current world, our deep questions, our beliefs, maybe even our collective anxieties or longings. Could some of them be faint echoes of these ancient epochs we've discussed?
And what future possibilities might these grand patterns suggest? If history rhymes, as they say, what might the next verse look like for human consciousness?
It's definitely a profound tapestry woven across time and consciousness. And the implication is we are all threads within it, participating in this ongoing evolution, something to really ponder.